This video was made in collaboration with 6 other Dying Light 2 YouTubers. Each of us have selected a topic to explore and showcase just how the game has evolved from 2019. Some of your favorite Dying Light content creators like OniZombies, NoviX, 80s Kid Grown Up, Backboard Films, Boy with Crazy Hair, and even a close IRL friend of mine from back in high school, Crayfish the Arrowed, who you may recognize from my earlier Mythbusters videos, was part of this collaboration. We've compiled all of our videos into one playlist, which is linked in the description, the comments, and the end of this video. So go ahead and check out their videos after this one, because I'm sure they would really appreciate the love. Alright, without further ado, let's get into my topic. I don't know about you guys, but when I hear the term choices and consequences being marketed for a video game, a few different illustrative examples immediately spring to mind. Telltale games like The Walking Dead, where seemingly at least half of the gameplay consists of making time-limited decisions, ranging from small dialogue options that have little to no effect on the outcome of the story, to straight up deciding which character lives and which character dies. Ultimately, the game only has a few different endings, but the journey of reaching the end of the game feels so personalized because of all the choices you made along the way, and all of the ways in which the consequences of those choices are demonstrated, from how your character looks, to how other characters treat you, to who actually survives the story. Then you've got games like Until Dawn, where it's kind of similar to Telltale games in that it consists primarily of dialogue options and QuickTime events, with the added bonus that you can permanently kill off a character through pure gameplay as well. But the thing that really sets Until Dawn aside from any Telltale game is the fact that you can have so many different possible variations and combinations of characters that survive in the end, because every single playable character is able to be killed off in the story. So in Until Dawn, there's no question that your decisions greatly impact the outcome of the game. I also think of games like Dishonored, where the different possible outcomes are fewer, but the choices aren't made through dialogue, and instead purely through gameplay, and whether you deal with enemies in a lethal or non-lethal manner. Although this approach, once again, has fewer variations when it comes to the consequences of your choices, it still manages to feel quite personalized, because the decisions purely come down to how you, the player, navigate the game. You don't have moments where you choose a piece of dialogue and then your character goes and says some stuff or does some stuff that you really didn't want them to. Instead, you have complete control. Every decision of whether or not to kill an enemy is entirely on you. It is a reflection of you, not the character. Lastly, I think of the open world RPGs that serve as the ultimate example of player choice. Games like Fallout New Vegas, where you have main quest dialogue options, little side quest dialogue options, multiple different factions where you can interact with each of them as much as you like or just go completely factionless. Companions that can be turned into permanent enemies, you can get important characters killed, and you can achieve several different endings both for the main game and for each DLC expansion. Even speccing your character into certain stats like speech and science can unlock several new paths. From gameplay to player customization to story, Fallout New Vegas delivers on all fronts when it comes to choices and consequences. From the moment Dying Light 2 was announced, it was immediately clear that the game was going for that Fallout New Vegas approach. Open world RPG? Check. Factions? Check. Dialogue options? Check. Chris Avallone, writer of Fallout New Vegas and project lead on several DLC expansions? Check. So for Dying Light 2's reveal, they got the Fallout New Vegas guy to introduce the game to the world and announce that it would have a choices and consequences system like no other. Quite a big claim, but having someone with an impressive resume like his leading the charge, it seemed somewhat feasible to live up to those words. This choices and consequences system was the main focus of the entire 2018 reveal, centering around a quest to negotiate with 2 men at a water tower to restore the water supply for an entire district. We also got a closer look at this mission in 2019. First, they showed us what happened following the Peacekeeper's orders, and even going as far as killing the 2 guys in the water tower. The water supply is restored, and there's even running water at ground level, but the district is now controlled by the Peacekeepers, who roam the area and strictly enforce their rules on anyone who wants access to that water. They then showed us how things could have turned out differently had the player decided to team up with the guys at the water tower and instead supply water on the black market. With you and the other survivors now controlling the supply of water as a precious currency, you gain access to new resources through trading. But with a lack of authority and restriction within the district comes a certain element of chaos, which attracts the worst kind of people who try to take everything for themselves. In the 2019 footage, we also see a mission where the renegade faction attacks the Fish Eye Tavern, and Frank, the owner of that tavern, gets injured. The player is then presented with the choice to either stay with Frank or to chase that renegade truck. Once the player reaches the truck, they're then presented with a couple more decisions, like kicking the driver Steve out of the vehicle. In this demo, the player decides to keep Steve in the truck, who then lets the player into the base by sounding the passcode. If the player had kicked him out, they would have had to find an alternate entrance to the compound. But then Steve just goes and sounds the alarm like a little snitch anyway. It's around this time that the player is informed that Frank has died, which even the Colonel himself seems rather surprised by. It's unclear whether the Colonel did instruct his men to kill Frank, or if Matt, the leader of the Peacekeepers, is messing with you and told you that Frank is dead so that you would make the decision to kill the Colonel. Regardless, the player is now face to face with that Colonel and now has a decision to make. Turn on the water pumps yourself, or trust the Colonel to handle things. I'm personally a pretty big fan of these kinds of decisions where you just don't really know whether or not the decision you're making is the right thing or the wrong thing, rather than being plainly presented with a good option versus a bad option. After the player in the demo decides to turn the pumps on themselves, we see a cutscene that reflects just how much this one story decision visually impacts the game. And there are some huge changes. The entire district gets redesigned, the water is removed, new areas are made accessible, and there's even a new type of infected you unlock. Yeah, like that was confirmed in an interview, by the way. The Drowner is a zombie type, which we haven't seen much of, by the way, that you can technically go the entire game without ever unlocking, depending on your in-game decisions. Granted, that was said in an interview back in 2019, and a lot has changed since then. So let's fast forward to 2021. By now, Techland and Chris Avellone have parted ways, and it's unsure just how much of his Fallout New Vegas inspired work remains in the game. What we do know is that the main story we'll be getting in the final product was not written by Avellone, as confirmed by himself on Twitter, but when it comes to side quests and choices and consequences and these little decisions, once again, we don't know how much of his work will make it to the final product. Recently, we got a glance at the latest version of that water tower mission, and it appears as though you're now immediately presented with two options: fight or negotiate. There's less subtlety involved, and the choice does feel a little bit more forced. They've also introduced time-limited decisions, similar to the other games that I spoke about earlier, where the game gives you a finite amount of time and a countdown timer to commit to a decision that could potentially impact the rest of your playthrough. We also got to take a look at exactly how assigning a district or facility to a particular faction works. There's this whole tier progression system. The more facilities you assign to a certain faction, the more perks you unlock from them. Peacekeeper rewards are centered around traps that help you in combat situations, whereas survivor rewards are all about mobility and accessibility, things like airbags, ziplines, and air vents. As we can see from Techland's own footage, airbags are presented as a potential reward for both the water tower and the electrical substation, meaning the rewards you get aren't tied to specific facilities. You unlock the rewards in the same order every time, and it's likely that you can't unlock all of them in one playthrough. But what you can do is you can bounce back and forth between the survivors and the peacekeepers to get a mixture of traps and shortcuts. We have seen allies like Hakan and Lawan react to these faction assignment decisions, but we've only seen them react through a little bit of dialogue, just like letting Aiden know what they think of your decision. We've yet to see any long-term or permanent consequences of player choices when it comes to characters, such as turning Lawan into an enemy. Not that I would expect Techland to reveal such information prior to release, but it does make you wonder just how many ways in which your decisions will have real consequences. When comparing current footage of Dying Light 2 with old footage that was released back in 2018 and 2019, anything to do with the story or choices and consequences is the hardest thing to evaluate and conclusively make any statements about how much it's progressed, because for obvious reasons, they're keeping that stuff under wraps for now. How immersive the story will be and just how much our actions and choices shape the world of Dying Light 2 is something that can only truly be answered once the game releases. I personally hope that they achieve that Fallout New Vegas approach that they were initially aiming for, rather than a somewhat linear story like Dying Light 1 with a few key choices thrown in there. In saying that, I'm also a big fan of how Dying Light 2 is looking more and more like an RPG the more we learn about it, but I understand that not everyone is a fan of that style. So feel free to voice your opinion in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out the playlist that contains videos from other Dying Light content creators, comparing different aspects of the game in that same 2019 versus 2021 format. From the HUD, to the combat, to the parkour, to the environment, to characters, and even little wildcard factions. There's some really great content in there, and I'm sure the creators of those videos would really appreciate your support. Cheers, guys.